All right, Patty, get us going.
Okay, this is our official welcome, but more than that, thank you to TexProtect for including the Valley in your listening tour. And thank you for everybody who's on the call today for taking that time to be here. We know it's so important to educate our legislators on the work that we do that impacts our community, as particularly now as we're going into the legislative session. So we have just a really strong community for folks who aren't from the Rio Grande Valley. To introduce that, we talk to each other, we work together, we know each other. So we're well positioned to have a real unified voice in what we do as collaborative and speaking to the needs of the community. So thank you again to TexProtect for helping us with this session and inviting us. And then later, you guys who know me, and I couldn't let that sit. I had to push it a little bit further and request a special session for parents, which we'll do a little bit later today. So we'll even have more input from the folks that really, really matter. But thank you all and welcome to the call. I'll pass it back over to TexProtect with Knox.
All right, Patty, thank you so much. And thank you to Easterseals of the Valley for being such a great partner with us. We are so appreciative and excited to be back working with you. We thank all of you for joining us for what we consider to be part 2 of this Texas tour. Our team really, and I should say who I am, by Knox Kimberly. I'm the interim CEO for TexProtects. Apologies for missing that step. Our team really enjoyed hearing from all of you last year about what was going on in your communities, what you felt were the most pressing issues for us to consider in our work in working at the state policy level to adequately support children and families. In my travels across Texas, there is no region of this state that better reflects the values of family than the Valley. And that is why I'm so excited for this conversation today. And we want this to be a very interactive conversation. So our team is going to take a few minutes to lay out what we know about the child protection and well-being landscape. And some of the key issues that we see as priorities heading into the legislative session. And then we want to provide plenty of time for the conversation, provide space for all of you to give us updates on information that we need to know, and to figure out how we can join forces to push these smart policy and budgetary priorities across the finish line during the upcoming legislative session. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our sponsor, the Texas Child Welfare Funders, and their Vice President, Christy Robinson, who is well known to TexProtects, having been involved with her family's foundation, the Hoagland Foundation, since 1989, having been an active board member, I believe, throughout its history, or nearly throughout its history, and serving as their chief program officer, guiding their funding decisions. They are based in Dallas, and their grants help strengthen that community by serving families and children. And Christy is personally invested in this work. She really walks the talk, serving on the Dallas CASA board as individually a CASA advocate herself, part of the Dallas County Hopes Advisory Council, and has been involved in the North Texas Child Welfare Funders Group for quite a number of years, and now as vice president of the larger Texas Child Welfare Funders Group, and a huge supporter of all things TexProtects. So Christy, thank you so much. Welcome to you, and please welcome our audience today before we dive into the program.
All right, thank you, Knox. I appreciate that. Like he said, I am the program officer for the Hoagland Foundation, and we're just a small family foundation in Dallas, but we have funded TexProtects since 2010, and just think that they do amazing work. So I am here with a different hat on today as the Vice President of Texas Child Welfare Funders. And I just want to tell you a little bit. First, I want to say thank you to TexProtects for offering this Texas tour, for our nonprofit service providers, our funders, and just others who care deeply in the work to improve child welfare in our state. I think the presentation is going to be great. It'll be a preview of upcoming legislative session and dialogue around the priorities for youth in care, which are exactly the issues that are important to the Texas Child Welfare Funders. We're just very pleased to be sponsoring the Texas Tour for our second year. So as you can see on the slide, the purpose of Texas Child Welfare Funders Group is to optimize the child welfare system from initial report to permanency. So, and always, of course, ensuring the best outcome for the child. We're a nonpartisan education peer group for funders, and we work under the umbrella of Philanthropy Southwest. So funders don't have to be a member of Philanthropy Southwest to join the Texas Child Welfare Funders. And this grew out of an initiative called North Texas Child Welfare Funders, but we've decided it's a statewide issue and we're trying to grow our membership statewide. So currently we don't have any dues to be a member of the Texas Child Welfare Funders Group. You can go to the website or the QR code and learn more about us, access our resources, some of which TexProtects has provided for us, join our email list, get monthly newsletters, join in meetings, and just stay current on the state of children in care in Texas. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the members if you want more information. So thank you again to TexProtects for this opportunity to help create such an important dialogue across the state about our child welfare system and really how each of us just plays such an important role in supporting every layer of the system. So now I'm going to let the policy team take you through the presentation.
Thanks so much, Christy. I'm not going to talk for very much longer because I'm actually going to pass it off to Patty again because we're going to enter into a time of focusing on legislative priorities. You'll hear plenty from our team here in a second, but Patty is actually going to jump back in and start us off by talking about some of the priorities that she sees for obviously the upcoming session. And like I said, then TexProtects will jump in with our priorities as well, and you'll see they're very much aligned. So Patty, go ahead and kick us off.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity to kind of look at our local priorities. And as I like to say, this is really a message of collaboration. So it's not a personal agenda, it's within our partners and our community priorities for really talking to legislators about the impact of these programs. So we have to advocate for what we need more of, but it's important, in my opinion, to hold on to what we have and don't forget the impact that those programs and services are having. So I would start with our Family Resource Center. We're in our second year of funding for that, and it's really already proved to be very impactful within our community. It's a place-based center where families who aren't connected to resources or partners walk in and they can get their basic needs met. They can get connected to not only maybe home visiting programs within the Easterseals network, but all of our partners, many of whom are here today. We don't do it all. So it's important to have that network of resources and supports. So I want to really thank our legislators for taking that time to really pilot a Family Resource Center, and the Valley has 2 of the, I think it's 7 or 8. So we're fortunate to have that, but we need to continue to mark the progress that that's having. Then I have to really continue to support our home visiting programs, our Parents as Teachers programs, and our HIPPY and our Safe Care home visiting programs. Those are all programs that are across the country and very, very effective evidence-based programs that need continued focus and continued funding for families in our community. Also, our ACI program, our Early Childhood Intervention program, there are 2 in the Rio Grande Valley. And we need to, this is an old program in all my programs, right? With under Easterseals umbrella. This is the old one. I mean, it's probably like 35, 40 years old now, but it's not the shiny new program, but it's critical. These are babies, these are infants who are born with disabilities or significant delays. We have to remember that this program is critical and has that Part C federal funding tied to it. The Valley has some of the highest zip codes of highest birth rates. So it's going to be important to continue to fund that, and not just fund it, but increase it so we can continue to serve the babies. You're not allowed to have a wait list. So we have to serve every baby that presents. So real important to really look at that funding and help grow that program that is going to only continue to grow as the community grows. And the last point that I'd like to carry to the legislators is our Help Me Grow work. We are a Help Me Grow community and there are Help Me Grow communities across Texas. These are trusted partners that are in communities and are already networked, already collaborative, and working together to close those gaps. So when legislators want to bring in a new program or start a new pilot project, isn't that wonderful? But my suggestion is go to your Help Me Grow communities. We already have that infrastructure in place, and we're positioned well to close those gaps, not to create a new program, just use what we already have in our collaborative system with across the state of Texas. So if I could, that's my wish list. Those are my 4 things. And if I was Oprah, I would say these are my 4 favorite things. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll kick it back to, I think it's Brittany.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patty. Very excited to see that list and excited to connect with you after this, because I know it won't be a shock to you, but we share many of the same priorities moving into next session. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and excited to partner with you all in that work. And thank you for all of us for joining today and spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. We're really excited to go over our legislative priorities with you and have a conversation. My name is Brittany Taylor Ross, and I am the Prenatal to 3 Policy Manager here at TexProtects, and I'm joined by almost all of our policy team. So Carrie Judice, who is our Child Protection Policy Manager, and Emily Williams, who is our Mental Health Policy Fellow. We had the honor and privilege last year, as Knox mentioned, of going to 8 different communities across the state and hearing from folks just like you on the themes and what you were continuing to see come up in your communities. Of what we heard over and over is the overall lack of support for children and families. That was just really a resounding issue that continued to repeat itself. We know that we cannot continue to do more of the same, and that we have to keep investing in more upstream measures in order to keep families together. So at TexProtects, we took all this great information that communities like yourself gave us. We talked with lawmakers, we observed interim hearings at the Capitol to try to figure out what was both feasible and what would have the most impact this next legislative session. So again, all of that kind of helped us to land on our legislative priorities that we're going to walk through with you all today. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with TexProtect, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. So we are the only nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization in Texas that is singularly focused on the prevention of child abuse and neglect. And we are also proud to be the Texas chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America. Through research, advocacy, and education, we work to promote smart strategies all along the prevention spectrum to hopefully prevent child abuse and neglect from happening at all, but also for strategies that will help keep families together and prevent removals. So to promote what is in the best interest of families and for kids' safety. As I mentioned, we took what you all had to say and really looked at the data and research to see what it was showing us. So I think you'll see here today that the information really points us to why it is so necessary to better support children and families. So let's jump in a little bit there. As a state, how are we doing compared to the national average when it comes to caring for our children? So I'm sure we all know and we are all familiar that Texas likes to be the best at things. We like to be number one, but we aren't quite there yet when it comes to supporting children and families. And according to the State of Babies report from 2022, as you can see here on the slide, there are some things that we're doing well and some things that we could be doing a little bit better to serve children and families in their communities. You can see that in Texas, we have more children who are uninsured, less families are receiving benefits and supports, and just overall, there's less resilience that we're seeing when it comes to family circumstances. So what does all of this data tell us? It shows us that families are really in need of support, and we need to be rising to the occasion as a state to really help create that safety net for children and families. And so here on this slide is just another way that we know families are in need of these supports. So we know that there are resource and referral networks like 211, and of course, amazing local ones like Help Me Grow, like Patty was just talking about. But we still have families that are calling the abuse and neglect statewide intake hotline because they just need to be connected to services in their community and they don't know who else to call. And so you can see there how steady this trend has been over the last decade. About 4 out of 10 calls to the CPS hotline are just because someone needs a referral to somewhere else in the community. We also know that the Department of Family and Protective Services recently launched what they're calling their Parent Helpline, which is really geared towards helping families get connected to resources, but also just more general parenting education and just being a resource for parents if they just need an answer to a quick parenting or developmental question. So we are curious to see what that new resource does to this trend line. And we hope the result is more families getting connected to resources. And like Patty mentioned, there are really great Help Me Grow sites popping up across the state. We are hoping that becomes, a universal resource for Texas, because that would really be the gold standard. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie.
I almost started talking and I was muted, y'all. It happens. So we also know that there are more investigations that are being closed out statewide without being referred to family-based safety services, or FBSS, which really is that stage of service that's in place to provide families with the supports that they need and to prevent removals. So it would appear that the Valley has followed this pattern as well. You can kind of see these lines look somewhat similar with their trend, with a few spikes here and there, but overall these numbers have gone down. And so here's kind of what we've been talking about. Just because a family isn't referred to FBSS doesn't mean a family wouldn't benefit from services. But if ongoing support isn't being provided through CPS, this means we must rely on our communities to reach these families outside of CPS intervention. And so we also know removals are down statewide. Overall, we've seen removals drop about 40 to 50% over the last year and a half. Some areas have been impacted more than others, but the overall trend is a decrease in kids coming into care. Again, for the Valley, there seems to be a more drastic shift in removals. It definitely has gone up at times and decreased significantly at times, as you can see on that bottom line on your screen. So similar to what you heard me say about FBSS referrals being down, I would say that just because there's not that preponderance of the evidence that's required to remove a child to meet that burden of proof required for a removal, it doesn't mean families wouldn't benefit from supports. So I do want to just kind of provide a little bit of context here, because there's been a lot of speculation as to why these numbers may be down. But the truth is it's really hard to pinpoint just one thing, as a lot has really changed over this last year and a half. And so there have been a number of internal policy changes at the department. For instance, CPS implemented what's called concurrent stages between investigations and FBSS, where they can really start jointly working a case as soon as they know the family would benefit from services that would promote family preservation ultimately. But what we're hearing is that this is actually resulting in cases being closed out sooner. Also, we know that there have been some internal policy changes that require additional approvals for kids ages 12 and up. So we know that last session, so that's some internal policy changes. We also know there were some legislative changes. You guys remember me probably talking a year ago about this change in neglect definition and how there can no longer be those non-emergency removals. So again, the intent behind the changes, whether internal at the agency or because it was what legislators wanted to see, was for less kids to come into care. And I think we're seeing that for sure. But for less kids to come into care, we would have hoped that that meant families were met with the services they needed in the community to be successful. But the verdict's still out as to whether or not this has been more helpful or harmful to families and the kids. And if, really all we can say that we know for sure is that they're not receiving those supports through CPS, because again, those FBSS referrals are down and removals are down. And now I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who's going to talk a little bit more about this, lack of supports and what's happening with kids in care.
Thanks, Carrie. So for kids who do come into the state's custody, we have seen another issue rise to the surface, which is actually a product of a capacity issue. Children without placement, or what you have heard referred to commonly as CWAP. When the state cannot find a placement for a child who either just came into CPS care or disrupted out of their most recent placement for any number of different reasons, they are taken to an unregulated setting that is not fully able to meet their needs, and then supervised by CPS staff or individuals they have hired to provide around-the-clock supervision. So these are typically kids with higher complex needs. This pie chart on the right side of your screen gives you an idea of what kind of setting they were in before the state was unable to find them an appropriate placement to meet their needs. They may have just spent time in a psychiatric hospital where they were deemed a danger to themselves or others, or maybe they had just returned from being on runaway status. But alarmingly, a good portion of these are youth whose parents have relinquished them to the state because they couldn't get them the mental health treatment that they needed in the community. So again, another scenario where supports aren't available in the community to keep these families together. And on top of all of this, Texas is still in the middle of a federal lawsuit that has been going on for over a decade that continues to show that the state's child protection system continues to place kids at an unreasonable risk of harm. The lawsuit has revealed things like overburdensome caseloads, leading to the agency agreeing to a goal of like 14 through 17 kids per caseworker. It also revealed things like kids being placed in settings with long histories of concerning deficiencies, leading to the need of heightened monitoring of these placements and more enforcement in the regulatory process. It has also continued to shed a light on the fact that our state is in need of expanding our array of mental health services. These are just to name a few. And while the state has made progress in remedying some of these issues, we aren't where we need to be just yet. So therefore, Texas will continue to be under the scrutiny of this lawsuit until we can make sure that kids who come into custody aren't experiencing further trauma in its care.
So you guys have heard, a lot is going on in this system, and there's a lot of pressure to do something different when it comes to foster care. So one way that's being pursued is to move away from that one size fits all state approach to one that is led by each community. The idea is that communities know their communities best and can adapt easier if needed. And this restructuring is called community-based care, or CDC. And it more formally began back in 2017 with the passing of what you may have heard forward called Senate Bill 11. It seems to be treated as kind of that silver bullet for a fix to the current foster care system. And CVC actually splits the state into 16 regions, or what you might hear people call catchment areas. And the idea is to contract with local providers in those different areas of the state to carry out foster care services. So the areas in blue on your screen are the active areas, and the ones in green are actually open procurements based on funding and approval from last legislative session. I just want to put this on y'all's radar just so y'all know that there's some things kind of changing with the rollout of this. Last session, there was a whole office created to be able to work on this implementation. It's called the Office of Community-Based Care Transition. And ultimately, it's a separate entity from the department. And again, it's about, helping with that rollout. And they've since changed the way that providers can bid on these contracts. So now providers who want to bid on an area can actually come forward whenever they're ready and propose what areas they want to cover. So it's just kind of a new process that we're all watching. And just so you guys know, we've had a chance to look, and we know that the department has come out with their legislative appropriations requests. Some people, you might know that as the LAR. And what we know is that they have signaled they want to actually expand this into 4 new areas. So based on all the information, again, that you all graciously shared with us last year, the data points that we just walked through, on our screens here, what we know is going on in the system that continues to show that it's in perpetual crisis. All of that is really, pointing us to say that we confidently know that we need to provide better supports for children and families all around. I know we sound like a broken record, but I think that is where all of these conversations and the data points us. And so really that's what our legislative priorities are aiming to do in different ways. And so now we're going to kind of spend a little bit more time talking about each of those priorities and kind of how we've landed there. But this was really just to kind of give y'all that basis of what's going on the ground, but also how that was able to help us shape what we are prioritizing. So I'm going to kick it back over to Brittany.
Thanks, Carrie. And I will continue to sound like a broken record, which I am totally fine with when it comes to prevention services. So just to keep that going, our first prevention legislative priority is to, of course, increase funding to the Prevention and Early Intervention Department that sits within the Department of Family and Protective Services. As Carrie mentioned, recently DFPS released its legislative appropriations request, which is really just a document asking the legislature for any increased funding over the base budget. So it's really a good kind of litmus test for us to see what are going to be priority items for certain state agencies as we move into the legislative session. Based on that legislative appropriations request, there appears to be a renewed interest on the importance of prevention services such as home visitation and resource referral, navigation type services for families in order to support families with young children. We were really happy to see that there was an exceptional item in that legislative appropriations request specifically to expand prevention and community well-being services by requesting $85.56 million over the base budget to expand home visitation programming by 50%, 50, very excited about that, as well as $2.3 million to support marketing and a prevention campaign for the Texas Parent Helpline that I mentioned a few minutes ago. This is really a substantial and historic increase in the prevention budget and ask for the department. And again, just points to that larger shift happening in the state around the support of these more upstream prevention type measures. So of course, we will be actively advocating and supporting the department in this request during the 88th legislative session. As you can see on this next slide, the Prevention and Early Intervention Division currently makes up just 5% of the DFPS budget in comparison to spending on child protective services. So this is a slide that we have shown a few times now. Our Texas store, Patty's shaking her head, and we will not stop until hopefully this pie chart looks a little bit different. And we're able to flip that spending on its head a little bit. So this again just really, tells us that we have to prioritize meeting families where they are and offering supports before a crisis occurs and CPS intervention is needed for safety reasons. So to do this, of course, we must increase investment in supportive services to help families get access to the services and supports they need at the right time. So our next prevention-focused legislative priority is to scale and expand universal prenatal and postpartum home visitation programs statewide. Evidence has shown that short-term postpartum home visitation improves maternal and child health and well-being, while also connecting families to the resources and supports they need at a really vulnerable time immediately after delivery. Universal means that the program is offered to all families, regardless of income or other eligibility criteria. And I also want to highlight that the programs that we're talking about here are voluntary. As you can see on this next slide, 1 in every 10 children in the US live in Texas. And this number we know is going to continue to grow as more families move to Texas and in light of the recent job decision. So we know there are a lot of young children and families in Texas. So who actually has access to these prevention services? As you can see on this next slide, we have about 1.8 million families in Texas with children under the age of 6. And about 413,000 of these families may benefit from home visiting services based on a few risk factors identified, but less than 5% of families who could benefit from home visiting services are actually receiving them. And as you can see here on this next slide, we pulled out a little bit of information specific to the RGV area, where you can see about a little over 2,600 families were served with prevention services through the Prevention and Early Intervention Department of DFPS in 2021. So what do we know about some of these prevention programs that are offered through PEI? We're going to look at a few outcomes from 2 different home visitation programs that are funded through PEI. That's Family Connects, which is a universal postpartum home visitation program in which a nurse completes a home visit to a new family in the first few weeks after delivery, and parents as teachers, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with. That program has been around for a really long time, and of course has a lot of robust evidence behind their really great outcomes. So as you can see here with the Family Connects program, families saw a 30% reduction in maternal postpartum depression and anxiety symptoms, 50% less infant medical care in the first 12 months of life, and then 44% fewer CPS investigations at 2 years of age, and 39% fewer CPS investigations at 5 years of age. And then we'll see there with parents as teachers, also some really great outcomes, 22% decreased likelihood of child maltreatment substantiations, and 50% fewer cases of suspected abuse and neglect. So we know that these home visiting programs offer successful outcomes for families and work to connect children and families to the resources and support that they need in their communities. So our strategy this legislative session, again, is to scale and expand universal postpartum home visitation through legislation and a possible budget rider. We had a similar bill and budget rider last session. If you were a part of our Texas tour last time or were following along in our legislative pursuits, and that bill was championed by Representative Donna Howard last session. The bill had some pretty strong bipartisan support, but just didn't quite make it to the finish line. So we will be pursuing this legislative strategy again. And the specific bill would create a competitive grants program within the Department of Family and Protective Services, that PEI Early Intervention Division, that would be able to accept funds from multiple sources to then distribute them out to community providers for the expansion of these voluntary home visitation services. I will now turn it over to Emily to talk about our next prevention priority.
Thank you, Brittany. So we've spoke a lot about prevention with home visitation and other services, And now I'd like to speak on prevention just a little bit more in regards to our ACEs priority. As most of you know, our aim with this bill is to make strides in improving the delivery of prevention services and increase the availability of these services so that all families and children from all backgrounds can access them in order to prevent ACEs from happening in the first place. And here on this next slide, we have a glimpse at the prevalence of ACEs in Texas. This is from the National Survey of Children's Health. I will say, however, that this survey is based on parent self-report, and it doesn't include questions about child abuse and neglect. So even these numbers likely underestimate the actual incidence of ACEs that is happening. There's a lot here, so feel free to read this slide while I touch on just a couple. The highest percentage comes from children that have experienced the divorce or separation of a parent, as approximately 1.8 million children have been impacted by divorce or separation, which makes up about 1/4 of children in Texas. The second highest was the 12.4% that reported, this was from the parents' point of view, that they reported that they had difficulty paying for food and housing from their household income, and they reported this at somewhat often. So while this data is crucial to understanding the prevalence, I want to remind everyone that these numbers do make up hundreds of thousands of children's real life experiences. And on this next slide, we know that often adverse childhood experiences can also be traumatic experiences. And we also know that trauma can increase the likelihood of negative outcomes across the lifespan development. Trauma poses great risk to mothers and babies, as it can increase health risk during pregnancy and cause preterm births and low birth weight. It can also cause significant deficits in brain development, such as cognitive impairment. It has been proven to increase the likelihood of one experiencing a chronic disease, such as diabetes, cancer, and among others. In the school and work settings, we often see children being expelled from school, having a higher academic failure rate, and adults losing time at work in order to seek treatment. And lastly, we know that there is an increased rate of participating in risky behaviors, such as substance use, violence against others, and unsafe or risky sexual practices. Okay, so now let's look at some of the economic impacts that ACEs can have. TexProtects estimates that in 2019, Texas spent approximately $52.9 billion on the lifetime cost of confirmed child maltreatment cases. Some of the most staggering numbers come from the national health spending costs, and with about $168 billion for illicit drug use and $160 billion annually for smoking. Research shows that reducing trauma within families can lead to better financial outcomes later. And those who experienced 4 or more ACEs across their lifespan were 1.6 times more likely to live in poverty as an adult than those who do not experience ACEs. And in 2019, about 1.5 million children were living in poverty, which this ranks Texas at about 40 out of 50 states when it comes to the overall poverty rate. And on our last slide here, all of the issues I've mentioned here today are reasons why we push the ACEs bill. This bill will help us connect with stakeholders and communities across Texas to better identify what is working and what is not to really tackle the cause of childhood adversity. It will give state agencies back community guidance to better identify strategies to increase effectiveness of state prevention dollars. We can then use these findings to propose recommendations to the next legislator so that we can continue to do what works, stop what doesn't work, and make children and families strong again. And that wraps up our ACEs priority, and I'll pass it to Carrie.
All right, y'all, I'm going to take us a little bit more downstream, but we're going to talk kinship. So just want y'all to kind of hear our ultimate goal, and then I'm going to break it down a little bit more. So ultimate goal that we're striving for this session is for more children to be placed with relatives by making sure these caregivers have the supports that they need. And actually we have 2 strategies in this area. One is a little bit more about informal placements, and one is about formal. And we're about to get into some definitions, but I just want y'all to know that we have 2 strategies. So again, let's talk defining making sure we're all on the same page. So what do we mean when we say kinship or kin? Because we often talk relatives, kinship, kin, we kind of use these words interchangeably, but I want to make sure y'all know what I'm talking about. So it's those relatives or friends of the family who step in and care for a child when it's unsafe for them to remain in the home of their parents. We know relatives step in and care for kids in all kinds of scenarios. And when kin steps in and provides care for a child in their home when CPS doesn't have custody, that's what's called an informal kinship placement. And I think I saw Denise join this call, so good to see you. I hope you will join my session to chat about this a little bit more over at Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. And so, you know, we know that, again, we've got those informal situations before custody. Well, whenever the state does have custody of the child and they're placed with a relative, that's what we're calling formal kinship placement. So just wanted to do some little bit of level setting to make sure we're on the same page whenever I'm using certain language. So you heard me mention two strategies, right? One for informal, one for formal. We're going to start with informal. And what we've heard time and time again is the two main barriers are financial and legal. When the state doesn't have custody, a lot of people don't know that there's actually no financial assistance from the department, nor any legal standing for an informal kinship caregiver to make decisions on the child's behalf. And this is something, these are some barriers we've heard pretty consistently across the board. So to address this, we want to actually see a pilot program developed that would ensure relatives are provided and connected to both legal and financial supports in order to prevent a removal. And we want to make sure a case manager is assigned to the relative caregiver, so somebody that is targeted to help the family, who can help them get the resources that they need. And ideally, we want to see this in a court so that they can help make sure that some sort of legal standing is in place if the case is dismissed, with the child remaining in the home of the relative instead of being returned home. And so we've got a lot of ideas about that, but I'm excited to see that one come into play. And excited to hear if you guys have some thoughts on that as well as what it could look like. The other strategy we have, again, is on that formal setting. So again, when the state has custody. Y'all may or may not know that whenever you come into care and you are caring for a child in your family, you have the choice to become licensed or not. For those who choose not to become licensed, we want to make sure that they are receiving pay parity in line with what foster parents receive for the duration of time that a child is placed in their home. And I'll get into that a little bit of how things are currently shaped. So what we do know is that, we know that the department prioritizes being placed with relatives, which is great. And at least 43% of kids in CPS care are actually placed with kin across the different regions in Texas. And when we're looking at these numbers, though, it's not reflected on your screen, but I was doing some digging, and there's really only a small percentage of relatives who actually decide to get licensed. For instance, at the end of last August of 2021, it showed that only a little over 8% of homes, like so relative who had stepped in to care for kids, only 8% of those homes become licensed. Anecdotally, we know that there's a lot of reasons why that may be the case. Maybe there's something in their criminal history check from a long time ago that's barring them from becoming licensed. Maybe it's some family dynamics at play that they don't really see the need to become licensed, or it might feel like they're going against the family somehow to do it, or even just someone not wanting to be under that much regulation. We've heard, like I said, a slew of reasons. And so I do want to just spend some time here to also talk about what does this look like over time to actually support kinship caregivers. I remember a time when a child was in custody placed with a relative, the state didn't provide any sort of financial compensation. And then you see on your screen back in 2005, we started seeing some stipends in place, which was great. And then TexProtects was actually really involved in the 2017 legislative session, and that actually shapes what we're looking at in statute today. And the way that we see that right now is that it's currently that kinship caregivers can receive up to half of what a foster parent receives for up to 12 months. There's a possibility of an extension under certain circumstances, but that's what we see now. And so if you're looking for an exact dollar amount, that's $12.67 per day for a kinship caregiver who decides not to get licensed. So I know you guys are kind of thinking through that number. Let that kind of sink in for a second. So what are we trying to do? Again, we've seen the needle moved over time to better and better support kinship caregivers. We want to continue to move the needle. So first of all, that 12-month limit, it's got to go. We want to ensure that relative caregivers receive compensation for the entire time the child is placed in their home. It just makes sense, right? We also want to remove that 50% cap. And then another little piece of this is we need to decouple the reimbursement rate from the current rate methodology system, since the state's in the process of having that totally redone. There's just some language in statute that ties it to the basic reimbursement rate. And so we just want to make sure that that's not a hindrance in the future. And another thing is we've heard a lot of stories where, let's say, a child is placed in the home of their aunt or a grandparent, and they don't pass the home study. So therefore, the department can't technically approve the placement. But let's say the judge says, you know what, this is in the child's best interest to remain in this home. I'm going to approve this placement. The child is going to remain there. Unfortunately, in those circumstances, the relatives can't receive any sort of compensation because it's not considered an approved placement. So we want to make sure that whether it's the department or whether it's a court, if the child is in that home and it's an approved placement and they are staying in that home, we want to make sure that the caregivers are appropriately compensated to help meet the child's needs. So we are really excited because there really is a big push to better support kin across the board this session. We're not the only organization advocating for this, which is really exciting. But I do want to be clear, because there are going to be some efforts out there to basically remove barriers to licensure. We are not trying to disincentivize licensure. I just want to make sure y'all know that. We support any and all ways to better support kinship caregivers. But we just want to make sure that for those who can't or don't want to for some reason, if it doesn't make sense for them, we want to make sure that they are better supported if they do not get licensed. All right, so now we're going to move on to data. I know you're going kinship data. This is very interesting. So for those that were around last year, y'all remember we actually had a data bill. And so what I just want to remind you guys of what we're talking about here. Historically, the department has only published and actually updated data on its website annually. And we want to make sure that there's real-time data made available, so monthly information. Child protection data is so important to be able to kind of track those trends over time and be able to pinpoint when something may have changed or things like that. But it's just so critical that we have access to it more than just once a year with those updated numbers. And so, you know, I also just kind of think about, as we continue to roll out community-based care that y'all have heard me talk about, where providers in different communities are stepping in and stepping up to the plate saying, hey, we're going to provide foster care services and really take this thing over. We need to make sure that those providers have access to the information that they need so that they can make efficient and effective decisions on the ground, but also so that legislators can make efficient and effective decisions about where they put their funding. So that's really our data piece there. I do want to show you guys, so y'all might remember me saying that last session, while we weren't successful in getting a bill, we were successful in getting a budget directive. So we've already gotten a glimpse of what it's like to have access to monthly data, and we want to make sure it continues. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, whenever something is put into the budget, that really can only be guaranteed to continue to happen for those 2 years, for that biennium. And so we don't want to have to come back each session and make sure that that budget directive is still in there. We want to make sure that this sticks so that, you know, if we have a different commissioner down the road, or maybe when there's no longer pressure from a federal lawsuit that you heard Emily talk about earlier, we want to make sure that this information remains out there. So stay tuned, but we are bringing that data bill back this session because we want to see it in statute. And then lastly, workforce. It's a pretty popular topic right now. We know that there's a lot going on, not just in child protection and child well-being. Across the board, workforce is an issue. But I do want to make sure we talk about what workforce we're talking about. So we're talking about those frontline workers. We're talking about investigators, FBSS workers, alternative response workers, conservatorship case workers. Our goal is to ensure we have high quality workers all the way up the career ladder, not just on the ground, but also in positions of leadership. And we think that this has to be tackled from several angles. You got to, look at recruitment. You got to look at hiring, retention, and promotion. And so I'm going to kind of walk through what that looks like at each stage. But so let's kind of talk about recruitment, hiring, and retention. How do we get people interested in working for the state? And then once they get there, how do we get them to stay? On this slide, unfortunately, you guys probably are hearing a lot about workforce turnover right now. We know it is bad. We know this is a hard job, and it doesn't get any easier. And so, how do we, when you see this and when you hear the pressure from a lawsuit and those things, again, how do we get folks to stay? And I know you guys have probably all seen the articles out there where there's been this mass exodus of workers since the beginning of the year. Again, how do we get people to be interested in working for the state when this is what they're hearing? What will attract the right people, the high quality people to work here? So we know pay is a factor in getting workers to feel valued and ultimately want to stay. You all may remember that TexProtects, we had the big push back in 2017 to get that salary increase for workers. And we're actually really excited to see that the department themselves in their LAR have also asked for a 10% increase across the board for caseworkers. But we also know that pay is just kind of one piece of that puzzle. So how do we promote a better culture and ensure workers are not overburdened? So one thing we actually kind of did some digging into is, again, how do we get workers to promote? So you got to start thinking about, okay, if pay is a factor, what's the differential? Like what is the, that incentive to want to keep taking on more responsibility? Does the pay kind of match that? And a lot of the digging we did kind of showed that, at least, they were meeting market value for other positions. Like when we looked at the state auditor's office report, shows that, again, the pay's in line with what others are making in this field. But it seems to be, maybe it's where it's the benefits that's kind of where we're kind of missing the mark here. Investigators, for instance, they lose their stipend if they promote. Higher up in CPS you go, you no longer can be paid for overtime. You lose the ability to make some money off of your travel check, those kinds of things. And we also just generally know that what we hear is that workers say, hey, the responsibility that we take on as we continue to move up that career ladder, it's a lot. And not really sure that is fairly compensated or fairly met, and that actually they get the compensation that they need at that level. So, again, benefits come into play, but what else needs to be addressed? So again, y'all keep hearing me talk about high quality workers, not just any warm body. We want to see positions filled all the way up the chain. And so what we're talking about is ultimately taking something that already exists. We don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel here. There's a human resource management plan that the department already puts out. And it just focuses on retention. So we think that a good idea would be for them to not just look at retention, but look at recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. So having the department kind of go through that process of figuring out what is it that we need to do at each of these stages for workers. And again, how can we get that high quality workforce that we're talking about? So I think having the department go through that exercise could be helpful and kind of get us maybe some answers before the next session to be able to go in with some recommendations. So that's where we're at on workforce. So now I know you've heard us talk a lot. Now we want to hear from you. So we're going to enter into a breakout discussion time. So we're going to have two different groups. It's very similar to what we did last time. If you were with us last time, we'll have one that's focused on prevention and one that's system involvement. You can see on your screen where, some of the topics that we'll be talking about in each. We ask that you all pick which room you think you can lend the most expertise and knowledge to. And we are excited to hear from you guys. We'll be taking some good notes. But if y'all could go ahead, I think y'all got something on your screen here. Choose which room you want to go into, and you'll have some TexProtects folks in each of those. And then we'll meet back here at, 4:50. Yeah.
If you do not see any options, please let me know which room you would like to go. Carol,
Are we in a breakout room right now? Because I selected prevention.
okay, no, you are not. I can assign you to prevention.
Okay, thank you.
Same here.
Carol,
Prevention.
Griselda,
Since Monica went into prevention, I'll go into the other one. That way we split our resources.
Deshawn,
I was like looking for my unmute button, y'all. All right, so we are back. I literally think I was mid-sentence whenever we were getting shuffled back. So if anybody else was like that too, it's one of those things. The time goes by so fast. So I know I really enjoyed the conversation in my group. I imagine Emily and Brittany did as well. So thank y'all again. I know we ask a lot for y'all to also extrovert on these things. You know, sometimes it's like, I just want to take information in. Why are you asking me to actively participate? So I do appreciate those of you that stuck with us and helped provide some really helpful information. We're kind of in this last 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to close us out with basically some resources and how to get involved. So let me share my screen again. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right. Are y'all seeing something that says get involved? Yeah. Okay. So, you know, again, just want to make sure that you guys know how to stay updated with what we're doing, how to potentially get involved with what we're doing. So I don't know if we've actually said this out loud, so I apologize. We will be sending these slides out. So, and a lot of these things are clickable where you can actually like go to the links and things like that. So I apologize if any of you have been feverishly writing things down. You will get these as well as the recording, just in case you're like, what did they say about this? So just letting y'all know that. So one of the easiest ways to know what we're up to is to sign up for our emails and alerts. This is literally something I copied and pasted from our website. If you go to TexProtects.org, which again is linked here, and you scroll down, there's literally a little box that looks like this on our website, and you can put in your information and your email. And that way, when our comms team is sending out different things like different events like this that we're doing, or maybe during session when it's, you know, some of our bills and priorities are moving, you know, we may say, hey, y'all, we've got these advocacy alerts that we would like you to get involved in, but it's ways for y'all to know what we are doing and ways to get plugged in. Another thing here is, you know, if you're looking more specifically how to get involved. So, okay, yeah, all right, y'all are going to send us some information. But if you're like, I really want to get more plugged in, I really like what y'all were talking about here today. There are ways to get plugged in, ways that, you know, we would love for you guys to reach out to your legislators. We would love for y'all to share things that we're sharing on social media. You know, we absolutely want you guys to get involved. And again, y'all see like advocacy alerts. That's something that we will be doing a lot more of during the legislative session. You know, when maybe that data bill comes around the corner and we need y'all's help, you know, pushing it across the finish line, or, you know, maybe our kinship bill or any of our prevention priorities come up for a hearing. You know, you guys may say, hey, I'd really like to be able to submit some testimony, or I'd like to call this office for you guys and show our support. I know we would really appreciate it. So, and we, as usual, we like to resource y'all well. So again, these are links here, but these are a of the things that we really promote a lot, and it's kind of all over the place. We've got our state of the state, which if you guys have been around for a bit, you guys know that we do this every year, and we take the different information that is updated from the department, and we try to kind of synthesize that for you guys and show you what it means and things like that. So it's a little bit more in depth than what we did today, but it does also have some of that information too. If y'all aren't familiar with our flow charts, we're also putting links to those. And y'all might have heard Christy kind of mention earlier about some projects that TexProtects and the Texas Child Welfare Funders have worked on together. That CPS 101 is one of them. But then we also have some other documents, as y'all can see on the bottom here. An advocacy toolkit for home visiting. Y'all heard Emily kind of break down some of the data as it relates to ACEs. That report goes more into detail there. And then we also have another report that just, what are our recommendations on how we can actually transform this system? So, you know, again, we are just so thankful to be able to come back and do this again with y'all. Thank you again to our sponsor for the Texas tour, the Texas Child Welfare Funders. I don't know, Christy, if you're still on, but we appreciate you guys sponsoring this event. And we're so grateful to Easterseals. Patty, I know our day is not over yet technically. We still got one more little event together, but it is always a joy and an honor to partner alongside Easterseals. And then of course, for all of you who took out an hour and a half of your day to spend with us and to provide us with feedback and insight, it's really invaluable. We love it, and thank y'all for doing that. And then last but not least, here's our information. That way, if you're like, how can I get some more information from you guys? I want to hear more about whatever it was we talked about today, or you have some questions about some additional resources, anything. If y'all have got some questions, please reach out. You can reach out to any of us. And if, you know, we can connect you to whoever we need to if we're not exactly the right person. So again, y'all will receive an email from us following the event, and it'll have the recording and the slides in there. But I'm actually going to give you guys back a few minutes. And so again, thank y'all for joining us, and we look forward to ongoing partnership with y'all. Okay, y'all have a good rest of the day.